record. So one thing, you probably saw this in an email I sent you recently, is we have an exam tomorrow. Thing I got to figure out. Okay, so yeah, tomorrow for 8, right? So everything's pretty much the same as last time. It's actually there's a little bit less material to cover, right? Before we had weeks 1 through 7. Now we've got 8 through 11. So that's really not a lot of material to cover. Obviously, I've already made the exam, and so there's enough to make an exam out of it. But at the same time, it's not going to be quite as difficult to prepare for as the last one. That being said, it's not going to be easy either. A lot of what we've covered is like Buddhist philosophy, which is pretty difficult stuff. This Robert Wright book, even though I think he's a good writer, his ideas are pretty complicated too. So we'll talk about this today, but we actually don't have a ton of time, right? Today, we need to go over all 3 of these things: Why Buddhism is True, McMindfulness, and this Against the Rules podcast. They're all about the same subject, mindfulness, but they kind of approach it in different ways. So it's going to be a lot of material to cover today. We're going to talk about this guy at the very end, Bhikkhu Bodhi. He's kind of an interesting guy. McMindfulness, evolutionary psychology, those also come from today. But everything else is fair game. So if there are things you're confused about and want to ask me about, I would be happy to go over them now. Do you have any questions about the exam? I'll give you a second to think. Questions about the exam. So while you're thinking and looking at this list of things you might or might not know, formatting is the same. The number of questions is the same. 8 short answer, which each has 3 sub-questions. Is that what I call them? Short answer. 8 question identifications or quotation identifications. Sorry, it's been a long day. 8 quotation identifications, each with 3 sub-questions, and then 2 short essays. All the point system is the same. So all of the other stuff should be familiar from last time. 75 minutes taken during our class period. I encourage people who are registered in person to take it in person. I'm not going to be strict about it for maybe obvious reasons. So, but anyways, the main thing is just take it at 1:35 tomorrow. Be prepared to take it at 1:35 tomorrow. Yeah, so that's the plan. And again, this is what it'll be about. So questions about any of these specific terms you want to go over now? Again, it's tomorrow, so now is the time to ask your questions. Can you explain the importance of the 3 jewels? Yeah. Okay, so that's a good question. So this is something that came up really early, and just to kind of demonstrate how I want you to study for this, if you haven't already been doing this, which of course you all have been, but let's see. That's Ramayana still, so it'll be after that. I think it'd be around this class. Yeah, so the 3 jewels, I could have searched for it and found it, but here they are. We use this to organize our explanation, our study of Buddhism. So the Buddha is the teacher. We all kind of know who he is, right? We learned about his life. He is the awakened one. He is the teacher. The Dharma is his teachings. So this is the Buddhist doctrine, his philosophy, the code of ethics, the ritual instructions. Basically, all the Buddhist teachings are the Dharma. And then the Sangha, we haven't talked about as much, but we did talk about one Sangha member at least. Remember Nyogen Senzaki, right? The Japanese Buddhist priest. So he would be a good representative of the Buddhist community. So we've talked about all of these things. And I like that that Tan is asking about this, because we can kind of make connections we weren't able to make before, right? We know the life story of the Buddha. We know some of the Buddhist doctrine, the Four Noble Truths, for example. We know about karma. We know about bodhisattvas and what they are and what they're trying to do, right? So we know actually kind of a lot of Buddhist philosophy. The Middle Way is another one. And then, yeah, the Sangha we've also encountered a bit. I think of the 3, we covered the Sangha the least. But at the same time, we did cover them a little bit too. So again, this is the intro class, so we could only get a little taste of each. But it's one way to think about what is Buddhism, the 3 jewels. And so what does it mean to be a Buddhist is to have faith in the three jewels. The technical term is to go for refuge, is how it's usually talked about. So good question. That's what the three jewels are. And you can kind of organize some of these other terms according to the three jewels. Other questions? Don't be shy. Now is your chance. Because again, the exam's tomorrow. Going once. I plan to give you about 10 minutes to do this, and we've only done 8 since the beginning of class. So I'm happy to give you time to think about these things, or we can get started, whatever you want to do. Maybe one more? One last term? Anyone? Oh, we got one. Okay. So Leo says the 6 realms and Mara and Mara's daughter. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff. So 6 realms. So what is this all about? We've got a list of all the different realms. I think the first time we talked about this, I I think I did one pre-recorded class for some reason. Yeah, I had a dentist appointment. Yeah, exactly. So I think this came around that time. So this would be a good one to, again, look over again. Here they are illustrated for you. They're basically, this is the Buddhist worldview. Remember, cosmology is this term, like how do people think about the world and the universe? It's time, it's space, it's also the different beings that exist in the world. And so these are the different kinds of beings that exist. Some of them we might be familiar with. Humans, for example, we are humans, we know animals. Some of them we might not be familiar with. We've got gods and titans who are always fighting each other. Again, this is actually kind of a reference to the Ramayana. Titans, the word for that is asura. They were called demons in the Ramayana. You don't have to make that connection, but that's what's going on here, right? Those are the 2 classes of beings here. And then the Buddhists add in these ghosts and hell realms as well. So these are the things that can happen to you when you are reincarnated. Each of these beings has a limited life, right? An impermanent life, and then they are reborn again into another place. Up here is more comfortable, up here is more suffering. So that's kind of a quick and dirty overview. It ties in with karma, right? If you do good stuff, you have a better rebirth. You do bad stuff, you have a bad rebirth. And karma kind of only makes sense, like we talked about, it kind of only makes sense in the context of multiple lives, right? Because otherwise, bad things would happen only to bad people. But as we know, that is not always the case. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. And so it only makes sense across multiple lives because then things from a past life, seeds from a past life might come to fruition in this life. So that's very quick. Mara and Mara's daughters, that's talking about the life story of the Buddha. Maybe that was the same class, actually. Let's see. Yeah, so he's, no, that's the Four Noble Truths. We want the life story of the Buddha. Yeah, when he's sitting under the tree, remember Keanu Reeves gets assaulted by all these different demons and tempted by Mara's daughters and all this sort of thing. So these are Mara's daughters here, and these are Mara's armies up here. Remember, he's shooting a very primitive gun at the Buddha. This is a very old illustration from like 1,000 years ago. So Mara is basically the Satan of the life story of the Buddha, right? He's the one who tempts him, tries to trick him. He's the one who meets him under the tree and tries to distract him from achieving enlightenment. So that's probably enough. Does that make sense, Leo? Good. Okay. All right. No other questions? If there are other questions, I'm happy to take them. But there is a lot to go over today, so why don't we get into it? Four Noble Truths. That's a big one, my friend. why don't I just tell you where to read that, and we can move on. So here's the life story of the Buddha. Definitely know that. Four Noble Truths is starts here, right? And there are many slides going through them. So just read through the slides, refer back to Kyon. But yeah, definitely read through that too, because these are the main teachings of the Buddha. Very simply put, the Buddha is trying to figure out suffering. Why do we suffer? And so he says, yes, first of all, we do suffer, right? And I think that's something we've come to understand this year better than most years. 2, suffering has a cause, and he explains what the cause is. 3, he says that it can stop. And 4, he tells people how to stop it, right? So that's a very basic overview. But yeah, check it out. Again, there's a pre-recorded lecture about this you can go back to too. So lots of resources for you on the Four Noble Truths, but definitely know them. It's a key Buddhist teaching. Okay, let's get started. So we did some mindfulness last time. Brendan and I were trying to remember, like, when did we meet each other last? And it was more than a week ago, right? It was like 8 or 9 days ago. So it just feels like a very long time ago. But remember, we were sitting here meditating. We had Headspace in the background, right? So I think that was last class. We also started to get into Robert Wright's book. Did we watch the clip from The Matrix? I think we did, right? The red pill clip. Does that ring a bell? Morpheus says to Keanu Reeves, "You were born into a prison for your mind." Talking about the Matrix, red pill, blue pill. Did we talk about that? Yes, we did, right? I think that's where we ran out of time. So, yeah, it's sort of a challenging book. I don't want to just gloss over it, but it's a little hard to do it in combination to everything we're talking about. So one thing I want to just focus on is maybe what is his argument. I'll open this up for you guys to get a sense of what you understand at this point. So again, if we look back at the review sheet, if we look here, this thing's driving me crazy. If we look here, we've got an author and we've got a book. So that means you should kind of know what this book is about, right? If, ideally you'd be able to summarize it in a sentence or two. So what is Wright's argument here? He's making an argument. He's saying Buddhism is true. And obviously you don't have to agree with him, but he's making an argument and he's trying to present a case that Buddhism is true. And so what is he arguing for? What is his point here? As you're thinking about it, I can try to connect it to the movie, right? So he starts us with The Matrix. And again, you can watch The Matrix for extra credit and write a little paper about it. Might be a good thing to do sooner than later. Maybe some of you already did it over the break. That's one reason I assigned it before the break. He's saying, just like the Matrix, we also are trapped in some sort of illusion, a prison for our minds. So why are we trapped in this prison for our minds? What is this talking about? And if you don't know the answer, we can open it up and start looking at it. I think the pages in my book are different than your book, which is sort of annoying. It confused me for the last class, but I tried to fix the page numbers on the slides here so they line up with your books, but not mine. So what's his point, right? He starts with The Matrix. Again, even if I've never read this before, I can look at, these headers and everyday delusion. He's talking about delusion. Del, are you wondering about the extra credit? Is that what you're asking about? There's a header that says why pleasure fades. Yeah, so the extra credit needs to be 2 pages. I sent it to you. Look for the email. You can find the instructions for it. If you can't find it, send me an email. I'll send it to you again. He says, unhelpful insights, the truth of mindfulness, right? So he's a pretty good writer in the sense that, again, I think he writes very clearly, which is why I assigned him. But at the same time, he's trying to make a very difficult argument, right? So if you went through this once and you didn't quite understand it, go through it again. Again, I don't think we'll be able to cover every point together here today, but we'll go over his main argument. So, what is Wright's main argument? What is he trying to say here? Can anybody summarize it? What is this prison of the mind that he's talking about? Why do we have this prison of the mind? If we look at the review sheet, here's a term that comes from this book, Evolutionary Psychology. I can start giving you some hints. He doesn't necessarily even quite talk about that. I think he calls himself an evolutionary biologist at one point. Like on my page, where was it? Yeah, page 6. He talks about evolutionary biology and the psychological implications of that. So what does evolution have to do with this prison of our mind? He talks about the hedonic treadmill. Okay. So Brennan said we evolved to seek pleasure. I think that's a good place to start. How did we evolve to seek pleasure? Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah. Yeah, we read it like 2 weeks ago. So it is a bit of a reach. It's a reach for me too. And again, the ideas are pretty complicated. So that's why I wanted to spend a little time on it. But yeah, Brennan, he remembering something. So he talked about how, in case you couldn't hear him, he's talking about how our brains are wired, right? And I don't totally agree with this argument, but I think it's a compelling one nonetheless. Our brains are wired to seek rewards, right? Dopamine or serotonin or whatever you want to call it. And he talks about what's his favorite thing? These powdered sugar donuts. You guys know what those are? The white ones, yeah, exactly. The ones that kind of make your mouth all dry. So he seems to love those. I again, not my favorite donut. I don't know if I agree with this guy on this one, but again, we should understand his argument nonetheless. He's saying the junk food, the powdered sugar donuts, they're so attractive. And we were evolutionarily designed to be attracted to these donuts because then our ancestors will get all the nutrients they need. And of course, according to evolutionary biology, if you have enough nutrients, it'll help you mate and produce more genes, right? Produce more offspring, and then things kind of go on from there. So, it's a decent argument. He's trying to build on biology, and I commend him for trying to do that. But he also says it's a bit of a trap. Right? Why is it a trap? Let's see. What was the section I pointed you at? Why pleasure fades, right? So for me, it's page 6. I don't know what page it is for you guys. But he points to this idea where we're always trying to seek something, but then when we finally get to it, it often is not quite as rewarding as we thought it would be. In some ways, what he's describing is addiction, right? He doesn't quite come out and use that terminology, but we think, okay, if I get to eat this donut, it will solve all my problems. It'll make me feel so good. And then he eats the donut, and it doesn't quite do it for him, right? He, of course, is enjoyable, but then he's immediately left with this feeling like, I just want some more, and some more, and some more. And he's saying this is we're biologically predisposed to approach life this way. Again, he calls it the hedonic treadmill. That's on page 10. Again, talking about indulgence, right, versus discipline, all of these other Buddhist ideas. So that's his main argument, is that biology has sort of set us up to be predisposed for disappointment, right, to be wanting all of these things and not really quite be able to achieve the things we're looking for. So what do we do? What's his solution? You just leave us hanging? I only assigned, I think, 2 chapters of the book. So we didn't get through his whole thing, but I wanted to give you the second chapter because it does offer some sort of solution. So what's the solution? What does it say at the top of the slide here? Mindfulness, right? He says the solution is meditation. So how does meditation free us from this prison for the mind? Well, like we said, pretty complicated stuff. If you don't really remember, we did read this a little while ago. I encourage you to go back to it before the exam. We can learn to accept certain things that are unpleasant. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, Eric. The second chapter talks a lot about feelings and feelings to be that are sort of like illusory. This is a disturbing photo, but it's kind of an important one, so I'll show it to you anyway. Have you guys seen this photo? You know what's going on here? Self-immolation. Yeah, that is the technical term. It's from 1963. As you can see, he did not survive this event. But as you can also see, this guy is on fire, and he's kind of not, I mean, he set himself on fire, but he doesn't seem so concerned about it, right? Have you guys ever burned yourselves before? I burned my finger making bread last winter. It's before the pandemic, I will say. So I wasn't just doing it because I was a noob during the pandemic. But I did just make a mistake. I touched a really hot pan during a baking session, and boy, did it hurt. It hurt so bad, right? And it continued to hurt. It wasn't like some quick, sharp pain like a cut or something like that. It just like burned forever. It felt like forever. I got some aloe vera on it, you know, like I have one of those plants in my windowsill, so fortunately that kind of helped cool it down. But boy, did that hurt. It was a crazy, horrible, searing pain. And, you know, I'm talking about just my little finger, just the end of my finger, and it was really messing my day up. This guy, his entire body is on fire, right? It's unbelievable. And of course, it's described in the book, right? In 24 for you guys, and for me around there somewhere. So a journalist who was there at the time was talking about how composed this monk was. And what's the point here is that Robert Wright takes this as sort of an inspiration, that what we feel does not necessarily represent reality, right? That we actually have a little bit of looseness when it comes to feelings, right? We might get a certain feeling, but we don't necessarily have to chase after it, right? And for you, it's on 24. I was searching for this the last class, but I eventually found it. Page 23 for me, it's talking about feelings. Maybe I'll just read it for you. On page 23, for you guys, 24. The question I'm circling around, which of our quote unquote normal feelings, thoughts, and perceptions are in some sense illusions, is important for two reasons. One reason is simple and practical. Obviously, this is the thing on the slide, if many unpleasant feelings of anxiety, fear, self-loathing, melancholy, and so on, are in some sense illusions, we can use meditation to dispel them, or at least weaken their grip on us. That's news you can use. The other reason is at first glance more academic, but it ultimately has kind of practical value as well. Figuring out when our feelings mislead us will help us shed light on the question of whether the Buddhist view of the mind and the mind's relationship to reality is as crazy as it sometimes sounds. Is perceived reality or a sizable chunk of it really an illusion? And that's the question. So I highlighted this point. He's basically saying if our feelings are illusions, these feelings of anxiety, self-loathing, fear, and so forth, if they're some kind of weird evolutionary byproduct, then meditation should be able to help us deal with them, right? That's basically the point that he's trying to arrive at here. So hopefully, yeah, we kind of come back to what Eric is saying. We can learn to accept things that are unpleasant. We can learn to manage them, right? Maybe if I did more meditation, my burning finger would not bother me so much, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's true, maybe. So this is one approach to meditation. How does that sound? Are we doing okay so far? Again, a little academic, a little bit difficult. The next one is from the podcast. It's a little easier to handle. And I think we can use this to sort of circle back to Robert Wright. So why don't we start with the podcast, and it'll help us understand the other one. So I guess first of all, this is Michael Lewis. He's an author of Moneyball and The Big Short. I read another one of his books, Flash Boys, which is about the stock market. So he writes about all kinds of different things. He's not a Buddhist studies guy, but he's a great writer. He's actually very clear, very, very skilled thinker, very skilled writer. And he has this line kind of in the beginning segment of the show, which I found really compelling. He says this: anyone can coach anything, and anyone doing anything now needs a coach. So I'll say it again: anyone can coach anything, and anyone doing anything now needs a coach. So maybe this is obvious. This relates to meditation, but what is he talking about here? Maybe one way we can think about this is, what does a coach normally do? Do you guys have coaches? Has anybody ever had a coach? What is a coach supposed to do for you? So this podcast, Michael Lewis Against the Rules, he did a whole season about coaches and different kinds of coaches that exist throughout our society. And this one is about what he calls performance coaches. So yeah, what does a coach do? Motivate and teach you strategy. Okay, I like that. Does anybody have specific coaches they want to talk about, or specific guide you, mentor you in a way, specific context where you have had a coach? Does anybody have a coach right now they want to talk about? As they say, the devil is in the details. It's more interesting to talk about specific things. I could talk about Frisbee if you want, but I feel like I do so much talking. Who has a coach here? Or who has had one maybe in high school or in some context previously? I know some of you do. I'm not going to call you out yet. All right, so Zamo said soccer coach. Okay, so that's a good start. So what did the soccer coach do for you, Zamo? He motivated you, he taught you strategy. Can I ask Zama, what position did you play? I don't know anything about soccer, but I think we can work with this. Offense, defense, center back. Okay, yeah. So it sounds like you're like, kind of an elite soccer player. All right. So if you don't mind, I'm going to use you as an example. Usually, let's say I'm your coach, my job would be, like you said, to teach you strategy. Right? You look at, I watch more basketball, you have these like kind of out of shape old guys telling, really in shape young guys how to play basketball. And it feels a little ridiculous, but because they know the strategy, they know how to kind of organize the team and motivate the team, people buy into it, right? It makes sense. And so what I imagine happened with Zamo is he had a coach who's on the sideline and was saying, all right, stay in this space, work with your teammates, right? I don't know enough about soccer to go into any more details than that, but it's talking about strategy, formation, but it's very specific things that are very important to soccer. Does that make sense? That's often how coaches work, right? And yet here Michael Lewis is saying anyone can coach anything. My response to that would be, I can't coach soccer. I don't know how to coach soccer. So why is he saying anyone can coach anything? What is he trying to get at here? As you're thinking about it, Tim Galway is the author of this book, The Inner Game of Tennis. You can see it's 1982. And this comment came after a conversation between Lewis and Galway. Galway has sort of this hilarious old man voice. I don't know. He sounds very charming. Yeah. He's like talking from the back of his throat, So he tells all of these very sort of charming stories. And Michael Lewis sums it up by saying, anyone can coach anything. You don't need a license or any type of training to be considered coaching. My high school coach did not know soccer at all. Okay, so Zamo has actually had some experience with a quote-unquote soccer coach who actually maybe didn't know as much about soccer as he should have. He literally said, chase the ball. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I would say if I were a soccer coach. So my heart goes out to the guy. Well, let's think about Galway for a second. So Galway is a tennis coach. He doesn't know anything about the tuba. He goes to a philharmonic or some sort of orchestra or whatever, and they have this brass section. Again, he doesn't know how to play the tuba. He doesn't know how to conduct for an orchestra. And yet he goes to talk to the tuba player and he says, hey, what do you find most difficult in playing the tuba, right? And I could say the same thing to Zamo. I could say, Zamo, what do you find most difficult in playing defense at the center back? And you can answer that if you want to. You don't have to. But this very specific question, and Galway says this is a great question, right? Because even if someone's like a really good tuba player or soccer player or whatever, they would still be able to respond and say, there is this thing that I find difficult, right? No matter what you do, there will always be something difficult. And for everybody playing along, I could say, what do you find most difficult in the exams for this class that you will have to take tomorrow, right? That's another type of performance you can think about. What do you find most difficult? And the tuba player talks about, well, it's this certain sound is hard for me to make. And then Galway asks him some more questions. He's like, yeah, well, I can kind of feel it in my tongue. And Galway says, okay, here's what you should do. Rather than just listening to the sound and trying to listen to it with your ears, think about the way your tongue feels when you are playing this certain note. So rather than focusing on the sound, focus on your tongue. And if you're focusing on your tongue, then you should be able to produce the sound that you want. Let's see what Zama said. You need to be a good teammate, first off, because you need to force the opponent to go wide. But if he cuts off your center, then your teammate needs to step up. So there's this issue of you want to keep your opponent to go wide. And frankly, I don't totally understand what that means. I can sort of imagine it, but you're trying to force your opponent into a certain space, right? So there's this very specific goal. It's a little bit hard to achieve. And so what Galway would do, he's better than I am at this sort of thing, but he would try to identify some very specific task that you could try to complete in order to keep your teammate wide, right? Maybe it's something in your mind, maybe some place you could be. I don't know. I'll let you use your imagination. But even not knowing anything about the tuba, he's able to isolate this very specific mental performance, right? This very specific focus, awareness that the tuba player could achieve, and in doing so, he plays the note very nicely, right? So this causes Michael Lewis to come with this pretty catchy little line here that anyone can coach anything, right? I could like kind of hype Zamo up and tell him to focus on some sort of mental aspect. Like, what are you thinking about when when your opponent is not going wide, right? And what can you think about instead to keep them going wide? I don't know. It sort of breaks down in this particular example. And the other thing is that anyone doing anything now needs a coach, right? Even Michael Jordan, even LeBron James, even whoever is the best at whatever it is that they do, even they now need this mental coach, because something will always be most difficult and they will always be able to do it a little bit better. That's what's being argued here. So if that makes sense now, I just need to get in front of the shot. So if he does shoot, I'm getting hit, then cover my face. It sounds like you're a good teammate, Zama. That's like a tough job too. So what we end up getting, and you don't have to know all of these details, none of them are on the review sheet, but who are these people? They're performance consultants, mental performance coach. Dixie Lewis is Michael Lewis's daughter, and she's a softball player. So what's the deal? What do they offer? Well, here's one example. Here's what Tiffany Gaskell looks like. I find it's easier to remember people when I can see their face in addition to knowing their voice. So what is Michael Lewis's problem? He says, I'll read it to you. I don't like the way I can be distracted by small irritations. He's talking about driving. What do we call that when you're distracted by irritations when you're driving? Is there a word for that? Do any of you get distracted by irritations when you're driving? Road rage, yeah. Does anybody get road rage? Zam, would you get road rage? Zam was being my go-to interlocutor today. Maybe. Okay. Well, we can leave it ambiguous. Road rage. Okay, not really. All right, so Zam was a chill bro. He doesn't get road rage. But Michael Lewis does get road rage. Possibly crashing sometimes. Yes. Well, and it makes you wonder, road rage, even if you don't get it yourself, I think we all know it doesn't make you a better driver, like Kevin is saying, right? If you get road rage, it often gets you into more dangerous situations, right? It's not a particularly good strategy, and yet it happens. So it cuts me off. I throw my car in Sport Plus and go in front. Yeah, that sounds a bit like road rage to me. So it's worth thinking about, why do we do this? If road rage does not make us a better driver, why do we still get road rage? We could talk about Michael Lewis, right? He talks about kind of two different mindsets. If somebody, he talks about people cutting him off, right? If he's sort of in one mindset, then he's just sort of amused by the bad driver. If he's in another mindset, he wants to like get revenge and go like start a fight or something like that. I get road rage because I'm in a hurry to go places. Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of an interesting question, right? What is the difference between these two mindsets that Lewis is talking about? And if we see road rage as dangerous, as a problem, if we can all agree that it is dangerous and a problem, maybe we wouldn't agree on that, but let's just assume that it is. What could we do to get less, as Michael Lewis says, less distracted by small irritations? Depends on which side of the bed you wake up on. Well, what this is arguing is actually there is something you can do about it. And so Gaskell kind of puts him through this exercise. It's actually a pretty long piece of tape. You know, you can go to the 26-minute mark and find it. And she talks about putting your feet on the ground. They're talking about this bubble, and she asks him what color is the bubble, and he says what? It was like blue or pink, right? Do you guys remember this part? And it goes on. I won't read this whole thing for you, but she's basically saying like, go to your happy place, right? Imagine a happy place, this happy bubble where you're thinking about happy things, and she sort of draws it out of him. She's like, what does it feel like to be more just sort of amused by bad drivers rather than upset with them? And she says, really go into that feeling, develop that feeling, close your eyes. Obviously not when you're driving, but at this time, close your eyes, think about that feeling. What part of your body is it coming out of? And she keeps saying like, maybe it's your chest, maybe it's your chest. He's like, no, it's not my chest. He says, it's my toes. And he starts talking about his toes. And so we end up with a practice where he is learning how to develop a capacity to sort of distance himself from his feelings, right? From these, if we want to jump back to this real quick, from these feelings of anxiety and fear and loathing and road rage and whatever else that cause us problems. So if we think about what is this practice, I've sort of already answered this question now. It basically is mindfulness. You guys agree with me? It's the same thing we were doing in class a week and a half ago. We were sitting here, we were breathing, the thoughts come, the thoughts go. Remember that, right? You might label them, oh, that's an irritation. Oh, that's something that I might have to do later, right? And what Gaskell is showing Lewis how to do is that exact same activity, just in a very specific situation, right? Rather than sort of a general mindfulness activity, this is specifically pointed to the activity of driving. And it will allow him to drive, theoretically, more safely, right? By bringing up this feeling that's in his toes now, that's associated with the body part, he can bring up this mindset and not be so mad. He won't throw his car into Sport Plus and jump in front of another car, right? Or crash into other cars like Kevin is saying. So perhaps, those of us who do have problems with road rage could think about something like this, right? Some people just count to 10. It's a similar sort of exercise. It's just take a deep breath and kind of let the feeling pass before you do something potentially dangerous, right? So how does this sound? Is this pretty clear? Can you see the connection between this and mindfulness? Again, it's just being repurposed for a very specific activity. There's one more example. It's a pretty long podcast, as you can see. This is coming in at the 30-minute mark. Here later in the episode, there's about like 20 minutes about firefighters that frankly you can kind of skip over, but it's not too long. It's like maybe 50 minutes or something. Here's another example. This is Michael Lewis's daughter, Dixie Lewis. She's a softball player, and she also is getting mental performance coaching. Like he says in the podcast, they're usually confidential, but because she's his daughter, she agreed to participate in this. So I guess maybe we can just start with this example. The guy Ben, they're talking, I think on Zoom or something like that. I feel like this was during the pandemic. I think this came out early pandemic. I'm not totally sure. Maybe it was just before it. He says, shift your attention to the way that your seat feels underneath you, the way that your seat feels, or that your weight feels on the seat. Why is he asking her to do this? What would that ever do for somebody? Why would you ever shift your attention to the way that your seat feels? And when they're talking, she, I think, is in high school at this time. He's like, I know this is sort of a weird suggestion. She's like, yeah, that is kind of weird. And so she doesn't necessarily even totally understand what he's asking her to do. But let's analyze it ourselves now that we know there's sort of this background to these practices. Why is he advising her to do that? Control her nerves? How would shifting your attention to the way your seat feels underneath you help you control your nerves? Yes. And so we don't know her situation. We might not know what distracts her. But again, in the podcast, you actually get a lot of information about her. She's an elite softball player. She, at that time, was trying to go to college. And so whether you are an athlete or not, there's a lot of pressure as you're getting ready to go to college, right? You're thinking about what schools do I want to apply for? What kind of activities can I do? So my application looks good. For her, she's thinking about what coaches are going to watch this game. She doesn't want to let her team down. She doesn't want to let her teammates down. She doesn't want to let her coach down. There's a lot of things weighing on her, right? And so if you couldn't hear him, what Brennan said is by focusing her attention on her seat, she is learning how to focus on the present moment, right? And let all those worries sort of fade to the background. When she's at bat, right? Again, this is another sports situation, but I think it's a really interesting one. Think about the pressure of somebody who's at bat, right? I'm not a baseball player, so I can't go into too much detail. But when before all this coaching, she was saying, don't swing and miss. You have to move the runner. Don't mess up. And of course, she doesn't say mess. She says something else, but don't look at your coach. Typically things that start with don't, right? She's thinking, I need to get on base every time. And if I don't get on base every time, then I won't get this scholarship and the coaches won't like me and I will just be a failure and my life will be over, right? She's thinking there's so much pressure on everything that I'm doing, right? And again, tomorrow you guys have this exam. If you're taking the exam and you're thinking, oh no, this exam's going to be so hard. And when I start taking it, I'm going to be thinking, oh, don't mess up. I can't get this wrong. If I get this wrong, I'm going to have a bad GPA. And if I have a bad GPA, I won't get that internship. I won't get that internship. I won't get a good job. If I don't get a job, it'll ruin my life. You guys ever think things like this? Maybe some of you do. Maybe not all of you. But our lives are generally populated with such concerns, right? And if we tie this back to Robert Wright, he would say it doesn't have to be that way. Right? Obviously, we want to succeed, but maybe something worth thinking about is do these kinds of thoughts, don't swing and miss, you have to move the runner. Do these even help us succeed? Do they help us get what we are trying to get? If you're taking this exam tomorrow, you just keep telling yourself, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't get it wrong. Is that going to actually help you get the correct answer? Maybe none of you want to say it, but the answer is no, it won't help you, right? Why won't it help you? Sometimes, Kevin, no, this is bad. This is not a good approach. You don't want to just keep saying, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. Why don't you want to keep saying, don't mess up? Why is this kind of thinking counterproductive? Stressing it too much. Exactly. It's distracting you from the actual task, right? So again, if I'm the baseball player, I'm thinking, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. I'm not thinking about hitting the ball. I'm thinking about all kinds of things. But one thing I'm not thinking about is hitting the ball, right? And thinking about hitting the ball will allow me to hit the ball. Pick C. Yeah, I don't think that's good advice, Alma. I think that's actually counterproductive advice as well. And so she switches to a different phrase, right? A different catchphrase. She says loose and aggressive. And it's really an interesting sound clip, right? Because she says it very sort of, I don't know, loosely and aggressively. She really embodies this mindset that she can develop outside of the game, and then bring to the game, bring to the batter's box when she needs it the most, right? So this is something that actually I gave advice to one of your classmates, is a similar sort of thing, right? Is imagine what sort of mind state you want to be in when you take this exam. That's exactly what Dixie Lewis is doing here, this loose and aggressive. Okay, that's probably enough on Dixie Lewis. How does that all sound? Do you feel like you can understand this whole thing about illusory feelings a little better now? And how we can understand why Dixie Lewis is full of these anxieties, right? Because that's sort of what our society is structured upon. But at the same time, it doesn't make them more true, right? They're sort of illusory desires. And the more we hold on to them as true, is it true if she doesn't get on base, her whole life will be over? Of course not. Is it true that if, for example, you do poorly on this exam, your life will be over? Also not true, right? This is not the end of your life if you do poorly on this exam. And yet, that's how it feels sometimes, right? These are illusions that tend to haunt us and cause problems for us. And so these people are arguing is through these mental performance coaching techniques, we can begin to deal with these problems, right? We can begin to focus on the task at hand. How's that sound? Does that make sense? Any questions about all that? Does anybody want to go out and find a mental performance coach? One thing I did not make a slide about, but I think it's a nice transition into this last part of today's lesson, is Lewis starts talking about Leonardo da Vinci, and he's like, why does this only develop in the last, let's say, 40 years or so, and particularly, the last 10 years more rapidly, right? We've got this book, Inner Game of Tennis, going back to the 80s, so it's not super new, but at the same time, in the last 10 years or so, it's really sort of taken off, right? You get these mental performance businesses and so forth. Why do we have these now? And why didn't, like, for example, Leonardo da Vinci have a mental performance coach? What is it about our society that has caused these businesses to develop? I know that's a pretty open question. Maybe you haven't thought about it before, but I think it's worth thinking about. Maybe another way to think about it is, what are these mental performance coaches designed to do? What do they promise? What are they trying to give to Dixie Lewis, for example? This we have talked about, but it's worth sort of abstracting it out and thinking about, okay, what's really at stake here? Improved state of mind for what? Okay. Say again. Tubaing, yeah. So if I'm this great tuba player, I could improve my state of mind and be an even better tuba player, right? For her, be a better softball player, right? Maybe this is helpful language. We talked about duty, success, pleasure. Remember those three? Don't worry, they're not going to be on the exam. I don't want to stress you guys out too much. But if we had to pick one of these three, which one is operating here for Dixie Lewis? What are the mental performance coaches promising her?
Duty.
I think Drissa said duty, but I don't know if I totally agree. It's success, isn't it? She's going to win the game. She's going to get on the base, right? Duty would be like, how can she be a good daughter or a good wife or a good mother or something like that, right? How could she be a good member of society? But really, this is success. How can she succeed in life? So what we see happening here is the use of meditation in order to succeed, right? The same is true for the tuba player. Maybe his duty is to play the tuba. I guess I can see what Drissa was coming from with that idea. But I think really the most clear answer is he's going to succeed in his task of being a good tuba player, right? This one maybe we could say his duty is being like a good citizen or something like that. But again, I think success is how to be a better driver and not get tickets and not get in accidents and that sort of stuff. The pleasure to win. Yeah, well, this is something we've talked about before. It's how pleasure and success get kind of wrapped up in each other in sort of disturbing ways, right? Because again, maybe she will not have pleasure in her life unless she wins, right? So that is something to think about. Regardless of which one it is, let's just for my sake, for simplicity's sake, let's say success.
Prof.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking that it is true that we aim for to win, but member of the team has a duty to make the win. So at that point, I think that duty comes first, because in the duty is to make the team win. So your duty is to contribute to the pleasure, but it is not your individual. Individually, we have duties to accomplish a collective success.
Okay, so the connection was cutting in and out a little bit, but I think I understood what you're saying. Is that we have a duty in order to succeed, and maybe the duty, we have a duty to our team, is I think what you were saying, right? We sort of we owe it to our team or to our small group together. Is that what you're saying, Drissa?
Exactly.
I'm not totally.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Is that what you're saying? Okay. So yeah, sorry. Again, the connection's not great, so it's a little hard for me to get it. But yeah, I guess you know what? This is actually a pretty good conversation, and it shows that it's not a foregone conclusion that is one versus the other. And I think Del and Drissa are right to say that there are concerns about duty and about pleasure wrapped up in this, and to say it's only success is maybe oversimplified. So I take your point. I think you guys actually are making good arguments here. That being said, regardless of whatever these three are, if we think about Buddhist meditation, right? We talked about the life of the Buddha and Buddhist meditation, the Four Noble Truths, and that sort of thing. What is the goal of Buddhist meditation? Is it so you can win the game or play the tuba better, to get on base? What's the goal of Buddhist meditation? Right, to deal with suffering. Great. And so how do you know that? Remember the four sights, right? The Buddha goes out, he sees these four sights, he's very disturbed by them, develops the middle way, right? The whole point of the Buddhist enterprise is to deal with suffering, right? To be free from suffering. And we're starting to see there's a little bit of a difference here, right? Is getting on base going to solve all of Dixie Lewis's problems? It might solve some of them. Maybe she'll get a scholarship and go to college, right? It could be kind of amazing. But at the same time, just like Robert Wright is saying, we get trapped in these illusions where the sense, if I just get this donut, it'll solve all my problems. Then if I just get the next donut, it'll solve all my problems. And then if I get the next donut, it'll solve all my problems, right? If we compare this enterprise to what we might call Buddhist meditation, we can begin to see some differences in motivation, okay? And so this next piece, the last piece for today, is the McMindfulness piece, this guy Purser. And I know we're going through this a little bit quickly, but hopefully we've got 20 minutes left. So hopefully there'll be enough time to sort of get all these ideas together. He makes a critique of using meditation very liberally, let's say, across many different contexts. So why don't we watch a little video to see an example of this? Pause the recorder. And okay, so what is the deal with the comfort zone? Maybe in the interest of time, I can be a little more pointed. So we just saw a type of meditation helping people get on base, right? To hit effectively, to be loose and aggressive. We saw a type of meditation helping people drive a car without getting into accidents and road rage and that sort of stuff. We saw meditation for playing the tuba. What is this meditation for? What is this even doing? Make you want to buy a pot pie, exactly. Yeah. What is Leo saying? They're trying to hypnotize the viewer in that video. Yeah, and I apologize if I hypnotized anybody. I wanted to demonstrate what meditation can be, but at the same time, yeah, maybe I do all of a sudden really want a pot pie. I kind of can't control myself. Yeah, how were they hypnotizing us? What sort of techniques were they using? He did talk about suffering at the beginning. I kind of forget exactly what he said, but something to the effect of it will ease your suffering, right? So this ad is even promising to, you know, solve this Buddhist problem of suffering. Now, will a pot pie really solve this problem of suffering? That's kind of an empty promise, isn't it? But again, it's an ad. Ads are full of empty promises. That's kind of what ads are, right? Like think about like a Geico commercial. You know, there are Geico commercials that I actually kind of like the one where they talk about scoop, there it is, instead of whoop, there it is. You know that one? Like that's pretty hilarious. And yet, does that have anything to do with the actual product of Geico? Nothing. It has nothing to do with it, right? It doesn't, you know, all it does is entertain me for a little while. And that's kind of what we have happening here. So anyways, let's get back to Leo's point though. How does it hypnotize people? What sort of techniques are they using? Visuals, affirmations, make you want to eat the pie. Yeah, exactly. And if I were actually eating it along with this video, which I imagine maybe some people might do, it would be sort of an interesting exercise, right? Have you guys ever heard of mindful eating before? You guys ever done this? A very famous one is for raisins. You can look it up. How do you spell raisin? Mindfully eating raisins. So what do? You take a raisin, right? And usually, you know, raisins are kind of delicious. I don't know if you guys like raisins, but you can take a big handful of them and eat them all at once, right? And just sort of cram them down your mouth. But of course, this is not what you do. So what do you do when you mindfully eat a raisin? You eat one at a time, place it in your mouth very gently, chew it very slowly, notice the texture, notice the flavor, notice whatever juices are filling your mouth, right? I mean, when you think about it, eating is actually kind of an amazing process. You're taking something outside of your body, you're putting it inside of your body, you're mashing it, and your saliva is digesting it a little bit, and then it enters into your throat, and you usually stop thinking about it at that point, but you could keep sort of playing the awareness game and try to see how long you can keep your mind on it. Now, of course, once it enters your stomach, it becomes sort of unrecognizable. So that might be a hard game to play. But this is kind of a real activity that KFC is co-opting here. But it's worth mentioning, why would people practice mindful eating? Why do you think that's a useful thing to do? If we compare it to mindful baseball or mindful driving, what do you think is the point of mindful eating?
Maybe keep you from overeating.
Yeah, it could make you think about this process of eating. Eating is actually a problem for a lot of people. Maybe you're aware of this, maybe you're not, but the more aware and mindful we are when we eat, then we will be more, we could say, in control, or at the very least, less likely to sort of binge eat, right? Or eat in harmful or dangerous ways, right? Eat for emotional reasons or eat for whatever other reasons. It will allow us to eat in a more healthy fashion, which is, of course, what a lot of people want to do. Now, if we come back to the comfort zone and this commercial that I forced you guys to watch, is this trying to promote healthy eating, mindful eating? What is this trying to do at the end? What's the goal of a commercial?
Make you buy the product.
They're trying to make you buy the product. They're trying to make the pies. Yeah, exactly. They're trying to make you buy a pot pie. They're trying to make them look attractive. And again, if we compare this motivation to, again, these other ones where maybe there's a sense of duty and we could maybe think about this as a positive thing. And again, in the end, I totally agree with Drissa and Dell, the points they were making. I think in the end here, it's all about money, right? That's all they care about here. A lot of money was put into this video, I imagine, or they had to hire somebody to make it, right? And the reason they did it is because they want to sell these pot pies. So to come back to the lesson that this is coming from, and this is in Purser's book, so if you haven't had a chance to look at it, you can find it on page 12 and 13. Purser, he calls McMindfulness, which is this commodification of mindfulness. We'll talk about that in a minute. But he calls it a feeding frenzy of spiritual practices that provide immediate nutrition, but no long-term sustenance. So what does that mean? Immediate nutrition, no long-term sustenance. It's sort of a metaphor for fast food, right? So it's kind of appropriate. We're talking about these pot pies. You know, if Dixie Lewis gets on base, as we talked about, is this going to solve all of her problems for her? No, she'll still have those same anxieties about getting into school, about do people really like me? How am I going to win their love? If I get on base, will I win their love? You know, maybe she's not quite thinking about that. But this is something, again, that we all have to deal with to a certain degree, right? There are all these pressures to perform all the time. And so what Purser is arguing is that these mindfulness meditations, they might act as sort of like a Band-Aid. They might solve some part of the problem, but they don't get at the core of the problem, right? So what is the core of the problem for him? He says that, I'll just read it to you, void of a moral compass or ethical commitments, unmoored from a vision of the social good, the commodification of mindfulness keeps it anchored in the ethos, and this is talking about ethics, the ethos of the market. So what is the ethos of the market? Or maybe I'll say, what are the ethics of the market? What's he talking about here? What is the market? Have you guys heard this term before? The market.
That's where we buy and sell stuff.
Yeah, we buy and sell stuff. Good. So what is the ethos? What are the ethics? What are the ethical commitments of the market? In other words, he's talking about capitalism. There's almost like a capitalist critique that's happening in this book, which of course, again, you don't have to agree with it, but I encourage you to understand it, just like everything else from this class. So what are the ethics of capitalism? What are the ethics of this capitalist culture? The ethics of KFC?
Maximize the profit.
Excellent. Yeah, maximize profit. Exactly. Maximize profit. The customer is always right as long as they're buying things, right? And so as long as mindfulness can be used to sell something, let's use it. If the Buddha can be used to sell something, let's use it, right? And so that's exactly what we see here. KFC is using kind of a fad, the fad of mindfulness, to try to sell pot pies. And I think this is still the case. Mindfulness is sort of hot, right? If we think about these coaching services, they are being sold, right? Let's not be ambiguous about this. Ben Oliva, Tiffany Gaskell, Tim Galway, all three of them make a living off of selling mindfulness, right? They are all trying to make some money. Now, they might be providing a service, and so that's also true. But in the end, the ethical commitment of all of these different groups we're talking about is how can we make some money? That's really what everybody is talking about in this McMindfulness critique that Purser is providing here. We only have 5 minutes left, and we could go into all of the details of this. He talks about Jon Kabat-Zinn, which we've seen before. He's this guy, the mindfulness-based stress reduction guy. And so we get a little critique of this. He's basically arguing that by saying we all have these attention problems, it's saying it is your individual problem that you can't pay attention. But actually, Purser is saying there's a much bigger problem. It's not your individual problem that you can't pay attention. The problem is the ad industry. The problem is this ethical, these ethical sensibilities of the market. We live in a society full of predation, of greed, and all of these other various, let's say, ills of capitalism. And he's saying just because you get to meditate to sort of solve your own personal problems, again, it's just sort of a band-aid that doesn't solve the more large social problem that we all have to deal with. You can read it in Purser's words. I don't think there's time for me to summarize everything for you. Mindfulness in business, mindfulness in the military, mindfulness in education. An example you might think about is like a sniper, right? Why would mindfulness be useful for a sniper, do you think? It would be, right? Can you be distracted when you're being a sniper? No, being a sniper is, I mean, I don't know anything about being a sniper, but it's a very precise activity where you have to focus. You have to focus your attention on a very precise instrument. And in order to perform the task, you can't be jittery, you can't be shaking. You know, if it was my task to murder somebody, I would not be able to handle it, right? I would not be able to focus. But maybe if somebody taught me how to breathe and focus my mind, you know, I could be a better trained assassin, right? Again, mindfulness is a tool that is somewhat neutral and that can be applied in many different ways. So what we end up with is this one argument that we have these evolutionary problems that can be solved by mindfulness, but then we have this other argument that mindfulness isn't enough, right? And that we actually are just kind of putting a band-aid on what are actually deeper social issues. And so let's give the final word. This guy's also on the review sheet. I don't, yeah, Bhikkhu Bodhi. I don't think he actually shows up in the reading. He shows up later in the book, but I wanted to include him anyway because he's kind of interesting. Let's give him the final word on how to kind of solve this contradiction.
Perhaps the great challenge facing Buddhism for the future is to bring together its rich tradition of inward-focused contemplative practices with outer engagement with the world.
Sorry, I'll turn the captions on.
If we have just an exclusive focus on contemplative practices, then we have the capacity to develop, call it beautiful, elevated, uplifted, even profound states of spiritual realization and attainment, but these states become sterile in regard to transforming the world. If we have just an emphasis on active engagement without the contemplative practices, then there's a tendency to spell our energy in various projects without the inner strength and spiritual resources to deal with these problems effectively. But when we bring together the strength, the equanimity, the deep compassion that comes from contemplative practice with a commitment to socially transformative action, then I think we have the double capacity to bring about the results that we aspire to.
Okay, I'm going to cut that off there because we are basically out of time. So if you didn't catch all of that, that's okay. You can come back to this. The link is here. It'll be in this. It's already in the slides. You can download the slides and go to the link. But he's offering a solution, right? We have this problem where mindfulness is being used to help Dixie Lewis get on base, but it's not feeding the hungry or solving any of the world's problems, right? And, you know, maybe a CEO like, I don't know, Elon Musk or Jack from Twitter or somebody, they're like meditating on an island somewhere and feeling good about themselves, but they're doing all these horrible things in the world. Who knows? What he's saying, what Bhikkhu Bodhi is saying, yes, meditation is important. We shouldn't get rid of it. We should make sure we don't get burnt out when we get involved in social programs and so forth. But we still need engagement, right? We still need to act in the world and deal with these larger social issues and not ignore them when we get swept up in our meditation. So that's basically what he's arguing. I think it's a pretty good argument. So that's why we are concluding with that. So, all right. So we're out of time. Any last questions? How do you guys feel about this exam tomorrow? Feel ready? Thumbs up? All right, good. more or less. Well, you still have time. You got a whole day. So good. Kevin's ready. I'd like to hear it. So please, go through the. No, Kevin, not to fail. You got to go in with this. What was it? Loose and aggressive. Loose and aggressive. Yeah. All right. Here we go. Go through the slides. They're there for you. I want to stress this. Download the slides. Have them available for the exam. It will help you. It's open book, open notes. So prepare your notes. Right. Anything you want. Prepare your notes. Yeah, and if you have any questions as you are preparing your notes, send me an email. I'll check my email tonight. If you email me really late at night, I might not get back to you till the morning, but I will check my email. So let me know if I can help. Otherwise,